The Greenwood County Democratic Party welcomes an up-and-coming educator and activist here in South Carolina. Emily Mayer lives in Bluffton, South Carolina, which is in Beaufort County, right?
That is correct, yes.
That's way down in the southern tip of South Carolina, somewhere below the equator. Am I mistaken?
That is about as far south in South Carolina as you can go.
Right. She has expertise in special education, and according to LinkedIn, Emily is the Director of Education at United States Youth Group, Youth in Politics. Good morning, Emily. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks, Bill. So good to be here.
Well, you're speaking with the Greenwood Democrats, so welcome to the Little Leagues, especially considering that you're now hobnobbing with big-name politicians like Joe Cunningham. How did that come about? And what does it say when he's photographed serving you a beer? Do you wield some political power in South Carolina that we're unaware of?
I didn't think that I did until that event took place. I was kind of caught off guard by it, obviously welcomed the opportunity. I'm never one to shy away from a public event, especially being newer in the Bluffton and Beaufort communities. To have a chance to be in person and be at an event was very, very welcome in my book now that I'm safely vaccinated. So was just looking forward to having a great time and getting to learn a bit more about Joe and just see some faces in the community that I have been seeing on Zoom for the past infinite amount of months. But when you know the right people, they connect you to the right people. So I must have been in the right place at the right time. And I was asked, hey, can Joe serve you a beer? I don't drink beer, but if Joe Cunningham would like to serve me a beer, I'm happy to accept that beer from Joe. So that was a great, great opportunity. And, he was a real great person to speak with.
And you're in Nancy Mace's congressional district. And she's turning out just to be a Jeff Duncan in high heels, saying some of the dumbest things online that somebody with a basic education in U.S. history and civics would laugh at. So disappointing. I actually had somewhat of a glimmer of hope for her, but no. So it must have been a relief to see Joe Cunningham in person. Had you seen him before, met him before that event?
I had not. So being newer to the community, I knew that he was our congressman when I had moved here, and I knew that he was up for re-election shortly after moving here. I was disappointed that we did not have that re-election locked up for him. But like you, I had some high hopes for Congresswoman Mace. She's not living up to those, but it was great to get to meet Joe in person because I know down in the Low Country, he is political fame. Everybody loves to have a chance to meet and greet with him. So I was thankful to have that chance to do so.
Among your many, many titles, you're also the third vice chair of the Beaufort County Democratic Party. How long have you been involved, and what responsibilities do you hold as the third vice chair there?
Yes, so I just recently was elected as third vice chair. We had a vacancy. So just about a month I've been in that role, but I've been involved with the Beaufort County Democratic Party since right around the election time. Coming to South Carolina during COVID, it was really important for me to kind of get my feet in the door wherever there was a door open. I knew leading up to a presidential election year in a state like South Carolina was vitally important. I had just missed out on the primary here in February when I came down in March. So I knew that I had a lot of ground to cover, that there were lots of people already getting to work and being busy. So I sent out connections and emails to whoever's name I could get a hold of. And thankfully, the Beaufort County Democratic Party, our chairwoman, Myra, is so welcomed me with open arms, has allowed me to attend meetings even before officially being on the executive council. And now I get to do things like run their Twitter, run their Facebook. So anytime that you see anything from Beaufort County Democratic Party, it's me making sure that the young voices are heard when making some county decisions.
Now, you said you moved down here to South Carolina, so that somewhat answers another question I had is, where's your Southern accent? And how did you end up in South Carolina? So give us a little background on the journey that took you here.
It is quite the journey. So if you ask me where I was from, I would tell you I'm from Maryland. Spent 20 years of my life in Bowie, Maryland with my family. That is where they still reside, my parents and my brother. Went to New Jersey for college and stayed there as a teacher. Getting to have the chance to teach in a state like New Jersey is a great opportunity, and wanted to have a few years of that experience under my belt. But ultimately, not being from New Jersey, you don't necessarily feel tied to it like some people who are born and raised there might feel. I met my husband there, so we stayed there for a bit because his family is there. But we always had a dream of going elsewhere. And if you had asked me at age 16 where I saw myself spending my adult life, I would have told you in the Carolinas, north, south. I wasn't going to be very picky. I applied to colleges all across North and South Carolina and ended up in the only school in the north that I applied to. So when the door opened and COVID came knocking and said, get out of this tri-state area, we were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to come down to Beaufort County, and we have been loving it ever since.
Nice. Now, tell us about your current role with the USYG. What is that and what's your role?
So USYG is a nonprofit group that is working to empower and educate the youth of our country in getting involved in politics at any level. So typically when you have a group like the Young Democrats, you have to be of a certain age before you can join and get involved. There are youth in our country who are interested in learning prior to being able to make the decision to join a group like the Young Dems or another group similar, but don't necessarily have the ability to. Maybe their schools don't offer the clubs, maybe the funding isn't there. So this has been a group that has kind of formed from across the country. The directors of the group are in West Virginia and in California. So we have a wide variety of representation on our board. My piece as Director of Education is to hold monthly training sessions about topics that can help our youth learn how to get more involved. In March, we held a session about women's suffrage and the women's rights movement in our country, because when we talk about women's suffrage in schools, those students don't always get a full picture of what that movement truly looked like and who were the integral parts of getting that change. So that was our first session as a new organization, was in March, had great reviews. In April, we had a panel about Asian American Pacific Islander support. And as we move forward, we'll be holding monthly programs such as how to apply to college, how to create a professional social media presence, things that we are seeing in this 21st century is important for people who want to be involved in their communities, but might not necessarily have the ability to learn from somebody either in their family or in their circle or in their education system.
Educating youth in politics and involving them, even more importantly, is so vital. And I kick myself because I'm a little bit older. I did not get involved until the 2016 election, until after that election. And I'd always voted prior, but otherwise I just wasn't involved. And then I look at what I've learned in the last 4 and 5 years. And I there's that term woke that the conservatives like to throw around as if it's an insult, but that's exactly what it is. I feel like I've woken up to what's happening in the country, and the things that we saw in 2016 is only the culmination of things that happened the last 10, 20 years while I was asleep. So that, I'm active now for the rest of my life, and it's so good for you to see it early on and encourage younger people to do so as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like even at the age that I am at, I feel as if I should have started earlier. And I don't want that to continue to be the trend for the next generation. I know that when you have lofty goals, the earlier you get to start, the better. And the later you start, the more behind the 8 ball you feel. So if there is any chance at all that we can be empowering and educating the right person for 20, 30, 40 years down the line, I mean, I would be hands to the sky, so thankful for the chance to even have had a small role in that development.
Exactly. Now, you recently testified in Columbia. Talk about getting involved. You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. You testified in front of a Senate panel about S531, what the bill authors called Save Women's Sports Act. Now, before we go further into that, we're going to pause for a couple minutes to watch that testimony you gave.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Good morning. S531 cannot pass. My name is Emily Mayer. I use she, her pronouns. I am a public school teacher in the great state of South Carolina, and I am an education policy scholar. I am here taking time away from my classroom and my students to ensure that S531 does not pass. I need my students and all students in this state to know that discrimination of any kind will not stand in South Carolina and that their teachers will fight on their behalf. One of the most important things I teach my students is that sometimes things do not go your way. You reflect, you move on, that it is part of life. To see our state leaders ignore the rules and change the process when they do not get their desired outcome is extremely frustrating. I cannot fathom how, during the hardest collective period we have faced in a generation, some elected officials in our state could read the news, talk to any of their constituents, and decide that now is the time to continue to push a divisive bill that will further isolate transgender youth. When trans youth are not accepted by their families or their community, they often turn to school to seek acceptance and support. S531 makes schools an unsafe place for trans youth. It isolates trans kids and tells them that they are not allowed to access the myriad of benefits of athletics. It tells them that they do not deserve the same respect and the chance to earn teamwork, learn about sportsmanship, leadership, and self-discipline such as their peers. It tells them that they do not belong. S531 is a bill in search of a problem that doesn't exist. There are already systems in place for trans student athletes in this state. The system has been in place for over half a decade. It has seen only a handful of applications come through, and even fewer of those applications have been approved. If this is truly a bill about fairness or integrity, as some have suggested, let's spend time discussing adequate funding for girls' sports, the lack of funding for public education as a whole, the teacher shortage crisis that continues to hurt students each year, or a laundry list of other barriers that stand in the way of the success of girls and the success of public education in South Carolina.
Okay, having seen that, so many questions. Okay, before we even get to the subject that you testified about, were you at all nervous, if not terrified, to stand there like that and provide that testimony?
I was absolutely beside myself. When you walk in to a committee or a subcommittee, you have to sign up to testify. So this was lists and pages of people long. So I wasn't even sure I was going to get the chance to have my thoughts heard, which is kind of, a relaxing thought when you're on edge, but at the same time, that uneasiness of, well, is my name going to be called?
Wait a minute. So you didn't sign up in advance to speak. You drove from Beaufort all the way up to Columbia and signed in along with hundreds of others maybe and hoped that you had a chance to say something.
That is correct.
Wow.
I didn't even know for sure that this subcommittee would be hearing testimony that day. I knew that S531 was going to be on their agenda, but depending on other business taking place, there was a chance that if they saw the amount of people in the room, they might say, we should table this for another time. So I went up there kind of hoping that they would table the discussion, because I know that the longer we put off having testimony and having to take a vote, the better it is for the people who are being discriminated against. So I was hopeful that maybe they would try to push this process off, but I was prepared in case they did not. And in fact, they did not.
Now, I love in your testimony how you said that the Save Women's Sports Act is a, quote, bill that's in search of a problem that doesn't exist. So are you saying that women's sports are not currently in jeopardy and don't need saving?
Women's sports are absolutely in jeopardy, but not for the reason that this bill suggests.
Right.
Further on in my clip, you can see that I go on to say, well, let's talk about funding of girls' sports. Let's talk about the way that we treat women athletes, right? There are so many issues facing women in the state of South Carolina and women who wish to play sports in the state of South Carolina. We could have a conversation about saving women's sports, but nowhere in there are you going to find me talking about excluding trans women.
Right. You know, it's scary that this battle is not only being fought here in South Carolina, it's being waged by Republican-led local legislators in states all over the country. And all saying the exact same things, almost plagiarizing word for word from each other. And with poverty, unemployment, healthcare, infrastructure as critical issues, why do you think there's such laser focus on this non-existent issue?
Because I think it's a hot topic. It's a hot button issue right now. I think trans issues across our nation are real, have been under a microscope, have been amplified. And I think our previous administration in the White House worked so hard to divide Americans as far apart as he possibly could that this was an easy place to force a divide. It's easy for people who maybe believe that they are LGBTQ supporters to still think that this bill is something that they should be in support of, even though it is anti-trans. There are so many conversations to be had, and something that I have learned in this legislative session where this bill has come up about 6 times in different areas has been how much education we need to do. As an educator, I'm always about educating. Let's bring it back to what we need to teach people. We need to teach people the right terminology when discussing transgender individuals. We need to talk about the discrimination and the barriers that trans individuals face on a day-to-day basis that the cis person walking around has no idea exist. Having a conversation with one trans individual will open so many eyes and make people realize so many blind spots in their own life that I wish everyone had the opportunity that I have had, that my colleagues have had, to be able to talk with trans folks, amplify their voices, and then share our message of inclusion as well.
You know, in that video clip, you described yourself as an education policy scholar. What does that mean?
I have a master's degree in education policy and leadership from American University. So I have a background in education. I have a master's degree in special education. But there comes a point where that doesn't quite feel like enough, right? In 2021, education is under attack, not just in the state of South Carolina. Public education in our nation needs some reform. And where can I use my voice and my expertise? And how can I have people take me more seriously other than just, oh, that's a public school teacher? So I chose to take myself back to school, get in a little bit more debt, and take on a second master's degree in education policy.
In addition to that, you've also listed yourself as a cohort of Emerge South Carolina. What is Emerge SC, and more importantly, what's a cohort?
So cohort is a group of people, kind of like a class. So Emerge South Carolina, Emerge is a wonderful program that is nationwide. Different states have different chapters, and they have started at different times. But what Emerge does is it trains and empowers women to not only run for office, but be successful in doing so, so that we can have more women at the table making decisions that impact women. And it's not just for women who are interested in running their own campaign. It's for women who maybe want to work behind the scenes and support somebody else's campaign as well. So some of the great things about being an Emerge is that while we're going through this, some of our Emerge sisters are already running campaigns. So we're getting to support them, work behind the scenes for them, hear about their experiences. And a lot of our trainers that come to us and teach us are other Emerge alum as well. So we're able to learn from each other and, you know, watch out, because Emerge women are in more places than you think they are. And we are coming, and we are ready to bring our seat to the table.
We've got you bookmarked as somebody to watch out for. And thank you. We're going to consider you a friend of Greenwood.
I am honored to be considered a friend. Thank you.
And we hope to meet you in person sometime in the future. I have a feeling you're going to be around and very recognizable in the not too distant future. I would love to
take a trip out to Greenwood. That would be great.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for the time you spent with us, Emily, and take care.
Thanks, guys.